Well, hello, friends, and glad you're here. We are diving back into Romans. We're in Romans 13 today. And as you recall, we're going through this section that talks about the outworking of our salvation, the sanctification, how that's expressed. And in chapter 12, we looked at outworking in the church. And just as a reminder, we looked at the relationship to self, to dedicate ourselves, service, our relationship with the saints, which is to love them, and then with regard to our opposition, to have peace, to shalom. So the four S words I used there were self, service, saints, and shalom, to help us remember that. Now, as we move into chapter 13, we're concerned about how our sanctification, how our salvation works itself, manifests itself outside the church. And there's basically two topics we're going to talk about. Today we're going to talk about in relation to civil government, touchy subject, I know. And then in 8 to 14, we're going to talk about in relation to society at large. So civil government and society. Now, when we talk about civil government, the basic instruction from Paul, and we'll see when we get into this letter a little bit more closely, is to submit. Now, lots of theories about how this applies, whether it applies to us today, ranging from, on the one end, theonomy. Maybe you haven't heard of that. Theonomy is the view that's held by some in the Christian community that our role or our goal is to bring the world really under the control of the church, and the church is to rule or govern using the Mosaic law as a guide. So this is theonomy, that's called. Some Christian nationalists, more extreme types of Christian nationalists, would subscribe to this. Another perspective says that the supremacy, talks about the supremacy of the state over church affairs, and the civil ruler also heads the church. So, for example, we see something like this in England, where the king or queen of England, the king right now, is the head of the Anglican Church in England. And he's also the, not so much a civil ruler anymore, but he's a constitutional monarch over England. The other extreme, I guess, is that we should have complete separation, that the church has nothing to do with the state, and the state has nothing to do with the church, and they shouldn't be related at all. The church should have its own governing rules outside the church. Again, something like what we see in Christian nationalism, this radical separation between the church and state. So with that kind of background, the variety of views that exist today, let's take a look at what Paul has to say in chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. And he begins here in verses 1 through 5 with really the command. I think what the command is. Verse 1, be subject to the governing authorities. He states the principle pretty clearly. It might make us uncomfortable, especially we live in a republic here in the United States. We get to vote. We see unrest in the streets when we don't like what the government's doing or someone's opinion. But Paul says, be subject to the governing authorities. Why is that? Why is Paul saying this? Well, read closely here. It says, there is no authority except from God. No authority established by God. So going back to what we learned about God's sovereignty, he's not only sovereign in salvation, which we learned in chapters 9 through 11, but he's also sovereign over the governing authorities. He puts them into place. So, verse 2, whoever resists the governing authority, whoever's resisting the government in place, is opposed to the ordinance of God. Wow. saying that to oppose the state is to oppose God. To disobey secular authority is to disobey God. It's pretty clear, pretty harsh. But he goes on here. Verses 3 and 4, the rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have no fear and you will have praise from the same. For the government, civil government, is a servant of God for your good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. So those who do evil, verses 3 and 4, pretty clear, those who do evil should fear the God-ordained government. Therefore, or so, Christians who do good are not to do evil should have no fear of government. And he says in verse 5, therefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. So Paul is bringing this together when he says therefore. He's making a conclusion, saying for these reasons you need to obey secular government. God has established them. Secular government is to strike fear in evildoers. And Christians are not evildoers, so they should have no fear of secular government. So be in subjection for the sake of wrath and for the sake of conscience. In other words, to avoid God's wrath and a guilty conscience, be in subjection. That's something, isn't it? It's maybe hurts our brain a little bit, but I'll get to the application of it in a little bit, but keep that in mind, that the main command here is to be in subjection to a government who strikes fear in the heart of evildoers. We get to verses 6 and 7. Paul talks about some very practical applications, what I'd call applications of this. And this section, 12 through 15, is just drips with practical application. It really gets into how we are to act because we are saved. We're getting clear guidance from the Lord through the Apostle Paul. And that again, main principle, pay what is due. Pay what is due. If you have a debt, pay it. If you owe taxes, pay them. If you customs, we don't have customs as much unless we're crossing borders and we have goods we have to pay for, but I'd say if there's fees that you have to pay, fees to the government, for example, licensing your car would be an example of a fee. Pay those fees. Respect. Give respect to whom respect is due. Remember, Paul is writing this just as Nero is coming on to the throne of Rome. Nero is going to be a scourge to the church, but Paul is saying here that if he deserves honor, we need to give him honor. We need to give him respect. So how do we apply this? These are tough words. Gets right down to where we live. Gets right down to the opinions that we form. Number one, obey the laws of the land. I think most of my viewers are here in the United States. I have some overseas, but most of you are in the United States. Number one, obey the laws of the land. That's what we're called to do. Obey, submit. Now, there is a limit of obedience, I think, cooked into these verses. When you are coerced to do evil, that is evil in God's eyes, when you are coerced to do that, when you are coerced to support evil, that's the limit of obedience. It stops there. Now, I'm not advocating at this point any civil unrest or any violence against the government, but certainly here in the United States, we have the opportunity to oppose our government at the ballot box with our political giving. We have all kinds of opportunities to influence the civil process. So the limits of obedience is met when you are coerced to do evil. Governments who coerce citizens to do evil they are opposed to God. That's what is implied by these verses. Governments who allow evil should be obeyed as much as possible and opposed as much as possible. So here in the United States, gay marriage is a established fact here in the United States. It's not been challenged in the Supreme Court, so who knows what's going to happen there. But it is allowed. We're not coerced into supporting gay marriage. We may be shamed, but the government's not twisting our arm, not coercing us. So what do? Well, as much as possible, we obey the law. We recognize that there is such a thing as gay marriage in the United States. And at that same time, we oppose the law as much as possible. So again, how do we do that in a practical way? We do that at the ballot box, do that in our contributions to political parties, do that in our civil conversations with those around us. That's how we do it. So here we are, first application or first outworking outside the church, and isn't this the case? It comes with our relationship with the civil government that we live under. So there we go, brothers and sisters. If you have an opinion, leave a note. I'd love to see what you think about this, but pretty straightforward what Paul calls us to do. As far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. God bless you.